Nobody inside the NFL expected this conversation to start this early around the Detroit Lions, but the more players speak publicly, the clearer one thing becomes. This roster believes the window to win is wide open right now, and the most interesting part is that it's not just the veterans talking with confidence anymore. The rookies are already acting like they understand the pressure, the expectations, and what it means to walk into a locker room that expects championships instead of hoping for relevance. That became obvious the moment rookie offensive tackle Blake Miller spoke about finally arriving in Detroit and feeling the reality of the NFL hit him all at once. He talked about getting the helmets on, putting on the shoulder pads, being around the veterans every single day, lifting with the team, learning the routine, and understanding that this is no longer college football or combine interviews. This is the real thing now, and honestly, Lions fans should love hearing that because Detroit desperately needs players who are mentally ready from day one. What stood out most was how comfortable Miller already sounds with the environment. He didn't complain about not having a rookie minicamp. He basically brushed it off like it didn't matter because now he's finally around the full team, learning directly inside the building. That mentality matters, especially for a player stepping into one of the toughest responsibilities on the roster. The Lions need stability at right tackle, and they need somebody who can adapt quickly because this offense only works at an elite level when the protection is dominant. And if you really think about it, that's what separates this version of Detroit from older Lions teams. The expectations are no longer small. Nobody is talking about development years anymore. Nobody is saying maybe in 2 or 3 seasons. These players are entering a roster that already believes it should be competing for a Super Bowl immediately. That changes the pressure completely for rookies like Blake Miller. But from the way he talked, it honestly sounds like he embraces it instead of fearing it. At the same time, there may not be a more important developing storyline on this entire defense than what's happening around Aiden Hutchinson, because for the first time in a long time, it feels like Detroit may finally be building legitimate help around him instead of asking him to carry the entire pass rush alone. That's why Derek Moore's comments were so important. You can hear genuine excitement when he talks about lining up next to Hutchinson. He openly admitted that just watching Hutchinson over the years taught him things. He talked about how much knowledge Hutchinson already gave him during conversations and how excited he is to grow alongside him and dominate with him, and Lions fans know exactly why this matters so much. For too long, opposing offenses focused almost entirely on stopping Aiden Hutchinson because Detroit simply didn't have enough consistent pressure coming from the opposite side. Hutchinson would command double teams, extra attention, chips from tight ends, and entire game plans designed to slow him down. And while there were moments where other pass rushers contributed, there still wasn't that true long-term answer across from him. Now the Lions are clearly hoping Derek Moore can become part of that solution. And honestly, this could completely change the ceiling of the defense if it develops correctly, because once offenses are forced to respect another edge rusher, everything becomes more dangerous. Hutchinson gets cleaner opportunities, the interior defensive line benefits, blitz packages become more effective, quarterbacks start making mistakes faster. The entire structure of the defense changes when you can pressure consistently without having to manufacture everything schematically. That's why Moore learning directly from Hutchinson could become one of the most underrated developments of the offseason. Hutchinson already plays with one of the highest motors in football, but beyond that, his understanding of technique, leverage, hand usage, and preparation is something younger players can absorb immediately. If Moore takes advantage of that opportunity, Detroit may finally have the complementary edge threat this defense has been searching for. But while the defense is developing, there's another fascinating conversation starting on the offensive side involving Jahmyr Gibbs. And this discussion may surprise a lot of fans because it's not about Gibbs playing worse, it's actually the opposite. The Lions may finally have so many offensive weapons that Gibbs doesn't need to carry such a massive role in the passing game anymore. That's the key point here. Last season, Gibbs caught 77 passes for 616 yards and 5 touchdowns, which is an incredible number for a running back. But now the offense is evolving. Detroit added more receiving options, more underneath playmakers, and more players capable of handling some of those short area responsibilities that previously went directly to Gibbs. There's growing belief that Isaac Tesla could see a much bigger role. Greg Dortch brings versatility underneath. Rookie Kendrick Law adds another quick option, capable of creating yards after the catch. Tyler Conklin also enters the picture alongside Sam Laporta, giving Jared Goff even more reliable targets over the middle of the field. So this doesn't necessarily mean Gibbs becomes less important. In fact, it may actually make him even more dangerous. Because instead of forcing Gibbs to do absolutely everything, Detroit can become more unpredictable. Defenses won't immediately assume every screen pass or underneath motion is designed for Gibbs anymore. And that matters over a full season because it preserves explosiveness, reduces unnecessary wear, and creates more opportunities for Gibbs to attack defenses in high-impact situations instead of constantly absorbing volume touches. And let's be honest here, this offense is still going to run through Gibbs in a major way. He's still expected to be the featured running back. The Lions still want to establish physicality, but now there are more weapons capable of creating problems, and that could make this offense even harder to defend than it already was, which brings us to perhaps the biggest pressure point surrounding this team entering the season, Jared Goff, because now the national conversation is starting to shift toward one uncomfortable reality. The Lions have built one of the strongest supporting casts in football around him, and once people acknowledge that, the expectations naturally become even bigger. Do you think this could finally become the season where everything fully comes together for Detroit? Or are there still major concerns you have about this roster before the Lions can truly reach the Super Bowl? The pressure around Jared Goff is only going to grow from this point forward, because when analysts start ranking the Detroit Lions among the teams with the best offensive support in the NFL, the conversation immediately changes from can Detroit compete to what's stopping Detroit from winning it all. And honestly, that's where this team is now. People around the league are openly saying the Lions have one of the top supporting casts in football. Between the offensive line, the running game, the tight ends, and the receivers, there are very few quarterbacks entering this season with more help around them than Jared Goff. And while some critics are trying to use that against him, there's another side to this discussion that Lions fans understand better than anybody. Jared Goff has consistently won games when surrounded by structure, talent, and stability. That's not speculation anymore. We already saw it with the Rams when they made deep playoff runs. We've seen it again in Detroit where the Lions transformed from a rebuilding franchise into a legitimate NFC contender. The idea that Goff suddenly can't perform in big moments honestly ignores a lot of what has already happened during his career. This is still the same quarterback who helped lead Detroit to the NFC Championship game. This is still a quarterback who regularly reads defenses at a very high level, gets the ball out quickly, stays healthy, and operates Ben Johnson's offense with control and confidence. And one thing that often gets overlooked is how calm he stays under pressure inside the pocket. No, he's not the type of quarterback who's going to scramble for 40 yards or improvise like Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes. That's never been his game, but what he does well fits exactly what Detroit wants to do offensively. He processes defenses quickly, identifies open targets, distributes the football efficiently, and keeps the offense on schedule. That matters, especially on a team loaded with playmakers. And honestly, some of the criticism surrounding the NFC Championship collapse still feels unfair when you go back and really look at what happened. There were massive moments in that game where Detroit had opportunities to close things out. Goff delivered catchable footballs in huge situations. The offense moved the ball. The issue wasn't simply one player collapsing under pressure. Football is bigger than that. Now, does that mean the pressure disappears? Absolutely not. In fact, it's probably higher than ever. Because when a franchise builds this kind of roster, eventually people stop celebrating progress and start demanding championships. That's the reality Detroit is entering now. Nobody is going to be satisfied anymore with almost. The Lions have crossed into a completely different tier of expectations. And what makes this even more fascinating is that the front office clearly knows it too. That's why the conversation around running backs became so interesting toward the end of these reports. There was actually discussion about whether Detroit should pursue another major addition like Chuba Hubbard, and the reaction to that idea says a lot about how this roster is currently being viewed internally, because when you really break it down, a move like that simply doesn't make sense for Detroit right now. The Lions already appear fully committed to Jahmyr Gibbs as the centerpiece of the rushing attack. Everything points toward this offense being built around his explosiveness, versatility, and ability to create game-changing plays. And beyond Gibbs, the Lions already made moves to strengthen the depth around him. There's belief inside the organization that Isaiah Pacheco can provide quality complementary snaps, while Gibbs handles the majority of the workload, so trading valuable assets for another expensive running back simply doesn't align with how Detroit has been building this team. And honestly, that may be the biggest sign of all that this front office has matured into one of the smartest groups in football. Older Lions regimes may have panicked and chased flashy names. This current front office seems far more disciplined. They're identifying specific needs, developing players internally, and avoiding unnecessary moves that could damage long-term roster flexibility. That matters when you're trying to sustain championship contention instead of chasing one lucky season. And this is why the energy around the Lions feels completely different right now compared to previous eras of Detroit football. The confidence isn't fake anymore. The roster depth is real. Young players are arriving already expecting to contribute. Veterans understand the urgency. The offense has weapons everywhere. The defense believes it's finally building a legitimate pass rush around Aiden Hutchinson. And the expectations inside the building are no longer hiding from the word Super Bowl. That's the part fans should really pay attention to. Nobody inside this organization is acting satisfied anymore just because the Lions became respectable. That phase is over. The mindset now is about finishing the job. But at the same time, that's exactly why this upcoming season may become the most pressure-filled year of the Dan Campbell era. Because once the league starts viewing you as a true contender, every weakness gets magnified, every playoff loss hurts more, and every missed opportunity becomes harder to excuse. And maybe that's why these player comments matter more than people realize. You can hear the urgency in the way they speak. You can hear the confidence, but you can also hear that they understand the expectations attached to wearing this uniform now. Detroit is no longer sneaking up on anybody. Now the real question is whether this team is truly prepared to handle being the hunted instead of the hunter. There's another layer to all of this that Lions fans should not ignore, and it's the emotional side of what this roster is becoming. Because when you listen carefully to the players speaking right now, this no longer sounds like a team hoping things break perfectly for them. It sounds like a locker room that genuinely believes it belongs among the NFL elite. That confidence starts with leadership. Dan Campbell has completely changed the identity of this franchise, and now you can see the effects spreading into every level of the roster. Young players arrive already understanding the culture. Veterans buy into the physicality. Coaches expect accountability. And perhaps the most dangerous part for the rest of the league is that Detroit still feels hungry. Usually when teams finally reach national relevance, there's a risk that players relax a little. That